Welcome, friends. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we'll break down the situation on the front and around the world as of May 13, 2026. Before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now and make sure you hit the bell. YouTube deliberately restricts the reach of military analytical content, and without your subscription, many of you simply won't see new episodes in your feed. Support the channel. It's free and takes 1 second. Zaporizhzhia direction, western flank. The map on the western Zaporizhzhia sector hadn't changed for several days in a row. That itself says something. When a front goes quiet, one side is either regrouping or preparing something bigger. Today, May 13th, pro-Russian mappers published the first update in this period. According to that data, after regrouping, Russian forces launched a counterattack on this sector and re-established positions on the southern and southwestern outskirts of Novoyakovlivka. Recall that it was precisely a large-scale Russian push towards Zaporizhzhia city that Zelensky and Sirsky had been warning about publicly for the past several months. It's quite possible we're now watching the opening moves of that scenario. At the same time, Zaporizhzhia city itself is being struck by drones, primarily targeting fuel depots, industrial facilities and warehouses where presumably the AFU are storing ammunition and equipment. Zaporizhzhia direction, eastern flank. The eastern flank is no less significant. The settlement of Charivny has moved into what's known as the grey zone. The AFU no longer hold it with any confidence, but Russian units haven't established full control either. Fighting continues. The trajectory of this settlement along the control scale speaks for itself. From firm AFU control through contested control to the current zone of Russian infiltration. A similar picture is forming in Huliaipol. According to reporting from the Storm Detachment, Russian units have improved their positions in the southern part of the settlement, around the farm area. Given the current frontline configuration, both settlements could fall under Russian control in the near term. In parallel, Russian forces continue methodically tightening the ring around Vozvizhenka. Yesterday, a large volume of footage from this sector appeared, strikes by glide bombs and FPV drones. Today, the map shifted. Vozvizhenka is one of the most heavily fortified defensive nodes the AFU hold on the Zaporizhzhia axis. Once the Kharkiv-Vozvizhenka defensive line is broken, only a few dozen kilometers will separate Russian forces from Zaporizhzhia city, a stretch they would be able to cover at considerably greater speed than the current pace of advance. Heavy fighting has also resumed in the Stepnohirsk and Primorska area. Russian forces reportedly destroyed more than 20 AFU drone command and control posts and continue systematically targeting the enemy's logistics and firing positions. Kostyantynivka sector. The Kostyantynivka direction gives us a detailed picture today. Ukrainian sources published footage from the Molokarki area, FPV drone strikes and artillery fire against forward Russian positions right inside the settlement. Based on this objective control footage, the conclusion is clear. Russian forces are actively working to establish a foothold in Molokarki, and may already have done so. Molokarki matters strategically. It sits north of Kostyantynivka. If Russian forces manage to hold it, Ukrainian units operating in the triangle of Chasiv Yar, Novodmitrivka, Molocharki, Vyrolyubivka could find themselves in a potential encirclement. The AFU position inside Kostyantynivka itself would become significantly more vulnerable under that scenario. As for Kostyantynivka proper, Russian assault groups are advancing from multiple directions, from Ilynivka and from southeast of the railway station. The Russian aerospace forces continue systematically striking AFU positions within the city perimeter. The Ukrainian side acknowledges that Kostyantynivka is beginning to slip away gradually. Despite fierce resistance, Russian infantry is pushing into the city in small groups, using infiltration tactics. Full control of the city is still a long way off, but the probability that the AFU will not fight to the last man and will instead begin an organized withdrawal toward Druzhkivka is assessed as high. A reserve defensive line has already been prepared there. There was a noticeable slowdown on this sector in the spring, apparently tied to a buildup of forces and resources. That pause is now over, and the tempo of the advance has picked up noticeably. Siversk and Sloviansk directions. On the Siversk sector of the Sloviansk direction, the main fighting is taking place on the approaches to Oleksandrivka. Near Kriva Luka, Russian units are expanding their zone of control along the southern bank of the Siversky Donets River. From the Sloviansk direction itself, only a handful of video materials have come in today. Strikes by aerial bombs against positions and river crossings. A strike on a crossing near Mayaki has been confirmed. No map corrections for this sector. Kharkiv direction. Along the Vozvizhenka River, small but systematic shifts are being recorded. Russian units stepped up activity immediately after the ceasefire ended and are pushing toward the most remote northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast. Reports indicate advances in the Chaikivka area. Fighting continues near Okremivka and Bochkova. The AFU used the ceasefire period to move reserves up to key sectors here, including the Veterinana area. In the Izbitske and Verkhnya Pisarivka area, positional fighting without meaningful changes on the ground. Sumy direction. The situation in Sumy Oblast deserves separate attention. According to available data, the line of contact is now approximately 20 kilometers from the city limits of Sumy. Local officials have reportedly begun destroying or concealing documents and are leaving the city with their families. No organized evacuation of the civilian population has been announced. On the Krasnopilia sector, heavy fighting continues along the Zaporizhzhia, Myropilia line, Dobropilia direction, and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. On the Dobropilia direction, positional fighting continues to the west and northwest of Hryshine, in the Belitske and Novy Donbass areas. Kyiv launches periodic counterattacks, but they produce no meaningful changes on the ground. In Nikopol, a mandatory evacuation has been declared. Residents must leave their homes within 1 month. Additionally, strikes on railway infrastructure in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast have been confirmed. Locomotives and rolling stock were damaged, and train services in the region have been halted. Earlier, the largest steel plant in Kryvyi Rih was forced to shut down due to disruptions to rail connections. Iran. Ultimatum and regional strikes. Now for the geopolitical bloc, and there's no shortage of developments. Iran published its list of conditions for resuming any negotiating process. To call things what they are, these are not compromise conditions, they are an ultimatum. The list includes a complete halt to hostilities across the entire Middle East, including Lebanon and Gaza, the lifting of all sanctions, the unfreezing of Iranian assets, payment of reparations, and, as a standalone item, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The United States will not accept these terms under any circumstances. Iranian Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf added a warning. The longer Washington delays, the more it will cost American taxpayers. At the same time, a growing body of evidence points to the UAE having covertly participated in strikes against Iran, despite official declarations of neutrality. One reported target was an oil refinery on Iran's Lavan Island, where a major fire broke out and part of the facility's capacity was put out of action for several months. In response, Iran launched a mass missile and drone strike against the UAE and Kuwait. The Emirates have not officially acknowledged any involvement in the original attacks. Against this backdrop, the American administration is seriously discussing resuming military pressure on Tehran. According to Axios, Trump is leaning toward limited military measures, either resuming convoy escort operations in the Strait of Hormuz or strikes against previously untargeted Iranian facilities. Israel is pushing the idea of a special operation to seize Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles, but the White House considers that scenario far too risky. The Iran question is set to be one of the central topics when Trump meets Xi Jinping in China. Washington is seeking guarantees from Beijing that, in the event military operations against Iran resume, China will not provide Tehran with military support. China, for its part, published a list of 4 red lines ahead of the visit. The Taiwan question, democracy and human rights, China's right to develop along its own path, and recognition of its political system. In essence, accept China as it is. Only on that basis is Beijing prepared for full-scale cooperation with Washington. Meanwhile, oil has been holding near the $100 a barrel mark for several days and shows every sign of continuing to rise. Ukraine, the Yermak case. This story deserves its own breakdown. Ukraine's High Anti-Corruption Court has begun hearing proceedings against Andriy Yermak, the former head of the presidential office, and in practical terms, the second most powerful figure in the Ukrainian power structure. The criminal case runs to 16 binders of 250 pages each. The Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, established with direct American involvement, is seeking pre-trial detention with bail set at 180 million hryvnias. The case has already acquired some remarkable details. During a search of the vehicle belonging to the former office chief's driver, investigators found documents with personnel appointment plans for the Security Service of Ukraine. 3 sheets headed Maximum Program, Medium Program, and Minimum Program, listing individuals currently serving in senior SBU positions. A further detail, according to the prosecution, Yermak took a number of personnel decisions after consulting a fortune teller. This was stated directly in court. Political analyst Oleg Tsarev offered an interesting perspective. He noted that part of the Russian media is framing Yermak's arrest as a coordinated move by Trump to pressure Zelensky into signing a peace deal with Russia. Tsarev flatly disagrees. The anti-corruption material is being actively driven by Ukrainska Pravda, a publication with no connection whatsoever to Moscow's or Trump's interests. In his assessment, what we're seeing is primarily an internal Ukrainian struggle over money and power. Stop spreading nonsense, especially the kind that hurts us, he concluded. Peace talks, freezing the conflict. According to a number of Ukrainian outlets, the US is exploring the possibility of brokering a temporary ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia in exchange for a partial lifting of sanctions on Moscow. The framework is causing alarm in Kyiv. The proposed agreement contains no security guarantees for the Ukrainian side. One Ukrainian official described it as a very bad deal that effectively gives Moscow a great deal. As US midterm elections draw closer, Washington's pressure on Kyiv is expected to intensify. The key sticking points remain unchanged: the status of Donbass, the fate of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and the mechanism for sanctions relief. The American side reportedly accepts that sanctions will be lifted as part of a final settlement. The Kremlin states that the conflict is close to its conclusion. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov stressed that the operation could stop at any moment, if Kyiv makes the decision that it knows it needs to make. Putin, according to Peskov, is ready for a direct meeting with Zelensky in Moscow at any time. A meeting on neutral ground only makes sense for the final formalization of agreements already reached. Meanwhile, the King of the United Kingdom once again reaffirmed his commitment to supporting NATO and Ukraine. Belarus. Mobilization. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko announced his readiness to carry out a targeted partial mobilization of a number of military units in preparation for possible armed conflict. In his words, modern conflicts demonstrate clearly that no amount of missiles and bombs can win a war without a ground operation. He cited the Iran-Israel-US confrontation as the example. Lukashenko called for the country's military buildup to account for Belarus's specific territorial conditions and to focus on the weapons the country actually needs, rather than abstract concepts. Germany. Economic decline. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz publicly admitted that the country has failed to carry out the modernization it needed. The German economy has been stagnating for at least 7 years, while neighboring countries have been growing, some of them substantially. The GDP growth forecast for Germany over the coming years stands at less than 0.5%. The country loses more than 100,000 industrial jobs every year. Merz's own approval rating stands at just 16%, a historic low. He has already been booed at public events, including when speaking about pension reform and cuts to health insurance spending. Germany is the engine of the European economy. If the engine has been stalling for 7 years in a row, this is no longer just a German problem. It is a Europe-wide one. That's all for today's episode. If you found the material useful, leave a like. It directly helps the channel push back against YouTube's algorithmic restrictions. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications. See you in the next episode. Take care, everyone.